Hello everyone, and welcome to the RV Inspection and Care channel. I'm Dwayne and I'm a certified RV inspector. And today we're going to be talking about whether or not you should be using solar power in your RV. You know, when you visit the RV forums, RV channels on YouTube, RV websites, why the subject of solar power comes up all the time. And you may be getting the impression that really it's for everyone, and you're missing out if you don't have solar power in your RV. Well, let's talk about that. And first of all, let's discuss how solar power works. Then you'll understand a little bit more about whether or not it's right for you. And then we'll discuss the pros and cons. And after all that, you'll be able to make a pretty good decision about whether solar power is something that really should be in your rig or not. First of all, let me start out by explaining this, and this is a simplistic way of explaining what happens with solar power. Essentially, solar panels gather energy from the sun. They convert that into electricity that is fed into a battery bank in your RV. There's a very big misconception that with solar power, you flip on a device or an appliance and then flip on the solar panel and it will run that device or that particular appliance. That's not the way it works. There has to be a central gathering point, the battery bank, for the electricity that the solar panels gather. From there, it's distributed to wherever electricity is needed in the RV. So that's important to have that concept. Now, there are 5 things you're going to need for a really good quality solar system. And the very first one, you probably guessed already, it's solar panels. Now, solar panels come in various sizes, but the one that's most common is about 100 watts. How many solar panels are you going to need? Well, it depends on your usage. For those that really only need to replenish the batteries in their devices, or they need to run lights at night, something along that line, very low electricity requirements, well, maybe 100, 200 watts, 1 or 2 panels might do you just fine. But if you want to run most things in the RV, you're going to need a more robust system, probably anywhere from 400 and up to higher end systems, 600 watts of power. Now, of course, there's very high end systems with more than that, but these are the ones that are most commonly seen. Now, the number 2 thing that we're going to need is a solar charge controller, because the panels have gathered the energy from the sun and it's sending out the electricity, but you don't want to send it directly into the batteries without any control to it, because you could overcharge the battery and actually destroy it. So there has to be a solar charge controller in between the panels and the batteries that is intelligently charging the batteries so no damage is done. The third piece of equipment that we're going to need is we're going to need a battery bank that is capable of storing all this electricity that is pouring into it for use. Now, the whole subject of batteries is very involved, and you could go on for almost days talking about batteries and battery banks. So we're not going to get in depth in this video on that. There will be another video that will talk about that in greater detail, but today we're just going to focus on the fact that we need a battery bank. Usually it's at least 2 batteries, and it could be 4 or more batteries, whatever it takes to store enough electricity from the panels that can run what you need to be run in your RV. Now, the number 4 item we're going to need in a quality solar system is an inverter. Why do we need an inverter? Well, batteries put out 12-volt electricity, but many of your appliances are going to run on 120 volts. You know, the plugs that's in your wall that look like the home plugs, that's what they're going to run off of. So you have to have some means of taking the 12 volts coming from the batteries and stepping it up to 120 volts to run those appliances. And to do that, you're going to need an inverter. That's what its function really is. Now, the number 5 item that's needed in a solar system is something many people shortchange, unfortunately. This is where some of the problems come in. You need good wiring. And it's going to require heavier gauge wiring for solar, especially around the batteries. And this is often seen that the kind of wiring that's used by those who install it themselves is very often not the kind of wiring that's really needed. So it's imperative that you use the right kind of wiring to make sure that the system is safe. Now, obviously, all of these items can add up to quite a bit of money. And they're not something that can be easily installed if you don't know what you're doing. So to avoid blowing a lot of money, you really should have a solar system installed by a professional, someone who really knows what they're doing. They've done this before, they're familiar with it, and know how to apply solar power to different kinds of RV settings. So when you're talking about all of that, obviously the installation can be expensive, the components themselves can be expensive, and when we give a general guideline, it can range anywhere from just $1,500 to a couple $1,000 for a small system, all the way up to $8,000 to $10,000 for a really high-end system, and of course in the middle around $4,000 to $5,000. So again, this is not cheap equipment. It's not a decision that you should make without serious thought. Now let's talk about the pros and the cons of solar power systems in RVs. The number one pro, the one thing that everybody loves about solar power, is you can then take your RV almost anywhere and you can run your electrical appliances without being plugged into anything. And that is incredible. To be able to boondock, to be maybe miles away from the nearest town, and you're self-sufficient. You have your own little grid working there. It's quite the experience. Number 2 pro, it's quiet. Yeah, the generators will definitely produce some noise. Solar produces none. You know how it sounds when you're plugged into shore power? There is no sound, right? You don't hear the electricity coming into the coach. The same thing with solar power. Super quiet. The number 3 pro, there's very little to go wrong with solar power systems. They actually require very little maintenance over the years, so they last and last, and that's a big advantage in their favor as well. And number 4, they're very good for the environment, and this may be very important to you. So they produce almost no pollution, and that's a very good thing for our environment. So those are the pros of using solar power. Now, what are the cons? Because there are cons. The number 1 con is, as it is with many RV things, is the cost. And the reason why the cost is as high as it is because it does require, in many cases, professional installation, and that doesn't come cheap. Of course, the components themselves are not cheap, but the installation is what really brings the price up. So if you're working on a budget, well, then you need to consider whether it's really worth putting solar power into your RV. The number 2 con, on cloudy days, Obviously, the sun is not out as strong, and the efficiency of the panels is going to go down. It will probably drop about 75% of its output in some cases. And if you get several cloudy days in a row, well, then your energy needs in your RV are going to get at a critical level. So you either have to have another form of a backup system for power, or just don't have solar power if you are going to be in an area where it can be cloudy for a long time. Number 3 con, you cannot power air conditioning with solar power. Now, despite what you may have heard, because there are those who claim you can, but the reality is this: you would need a very big, expensive solar power system to run air conditioners, and yes, you can run them that way, but you can only run them for a few hours at most. So don't plan on running air conditioners from a solar power system. If you are spending a lot of time in temperate areas, and face it, a lot of us like to take our RVs into places where it's nice and warm, and it can get maybe into the hot region a little bit, well, don't expect to get any help from a solar power system to run your air conditioners. Number 4 con, all of this equipment is going to probably be permanently mounted in your RV. So if you sell the RV, you probably are going to see that whole system go with it when you sell it. I mean, after all, you don't want to be going up on your roof and removing your solar panels and leaving holes in the roof that have to be patched, going through and stripping out wires and all of that, and then get your new RV and have to go in and reinstall that again. So all of that is something you need to consider in advance. Are you going to keep the RV you have for a while or not? Well, those are the pros and the cons of solar power systems in RVs. Let me say this too, my friends. If you are staying in campgrounds most of the time, it's the kind of camping that you like to do, then you're probably not going to get hardly any benefit out of a solar power system other than the fact of just the wow factor and the fact that you have it. Because the shore power will do everything that you need. So if you are boondocking, on the other hand, it can really be a godsend to have a solar power system. I mean, to be out in the middle of nowhere with nothing available to you for power and still be able to run everything in your RV is really an incredible experience. So let's wind up by discussing some of the thoughts that you should consider before just installing a solar system in your RV. First of all, where are you going to be camping? If it's campgrounds, then you probably don't need solar power. Next, what part of the country do you plan on camping in? If you're going to be in temperate areas where the temperature could rise in the high 80s and low 90s, then maybe solar power is not good for you because you can't run your air conditioning system and keep things comfortable in the RV that way. The next consideration, what are your electricity needs? Here's a very important thing to consider, a principle. The more electricity you need to consume, the less a solar power system is attractive for you. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you like to be running high wattage devices like microwaves and convection ovens and washer dryers and hair dryers and all of those kinds of things, the less a solar power system is going to be attractive and needed for you. On the other hand, if you are very frugal with electricity and you have low electricity needs, the more a solar power system can really benefit you. Finally, how long are you going to keep that RV? That's a very important consideration. If you are one who likes to change their RV every couple of years or so, you're just not going to get the cost effectiveness out of a solar power system. But if you think you're going to hold on to the RV you have for a very long time, then it could be a very good choice for you. Well, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. What we're trying to do is give the pros and the cons, the advantages and the disadvantages. If this was helpful for you, please like the video. That really helps us YouTube creators when you do. And if you have anything that you can contribute to this discussion about solar power, please enter it in the comments below. We would love to hear what you have to say. And finally, we would love to have you join our online family. And to do that, all you have to do is hit that subscribe button. And that way you won't miss any of the videos that I'm putting out on a weekly basis. Well, that's it for now. Have safe and happy travels, my friends. Until next time.